I want to introduce our first guest. Dr. Mark Roseman knows our pain. He knows it deep down. And he's you can talk to people who are in it for various reasons, but if they feel it, there's a passion about it. This man's gone all over the country, and I'll read his background, but it's not the same as a man who can tell it, and why he's here, and why he came long distance to be here to talk to you. But I'll read it. Dr. Mark Roseman is a multi-state certified family mediator specializing in high conflict divorce and parental alienation. He writes editorial commentary for the Huffington Post and is a contributing writer for 400 newspapers of the Knight Ridder Tribune Syndicate. Mark is also the founder of the Toby Center for Family Transitions, Inc. in South Florida. His program centers around the needs of families when parents choose to separate, whether they are single, separated, just divorcing, or never married. That program is a national model for serving divorcing population and their children. He's been a guest speaker at events nationwide. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Mark Roseman.
Dearly beloved, we are wrong event, pardon me.
That's Saturday.
I want to thank you all for being here today. As I listened to Leon, as you have, there are a number of points that he made that I thought I would share, and I only have, I asked for an additional half hour. I got another 5 minutes, so I want to pace myself as I move forward. Some of my comments I shared in Harrisburg. So, Chris, my apologies to you, but these points need to be understood. And the first thing I do want to share with you is that what I believe is, in the last 2 years, when people have been running for office, I have contacted political parties, and I have said, if you want to win this election, guess what? You have to speak to and speak in behalf of the silent majority, and you'll win. What's the silent majority? I said single parents. Single parents. They constitute 40%. Kids in public schools constitute 40%. Let me restate that. 40% of public school children live in single parent households. Now that's the framework in which we live today. That wasn't the case 25 years ago or 20 years ago. But bless you all for being here today, and I want to thank so many of you for traveling near and far to be here. Child custody, this is from my book, Preserving Family Ties, but child custody is the most overriding and very frequently the most fundamental and sobering focus when parents split. And what Leon said is that the political leadership either doesn't get it, or they're in denial, or they don't give a damn. Why? Because they come from the elitist culture which takes advantage of parents in conflict. And the first thing they do is take a look at financial affidavits, right?
Network.
But what I want to share with you is a number of things. First of all, think of this: acknowledgement, recognition, and support. And I want to share that with you now because I may forget afterwards, but acknowledge who you are and where you're at. And understand that where you're at now, as this poor man who killed himself after 3 years of being so frustrated in court. I've been targeted parent for over 20 years. But I learned to make lemonade, and it's not easy to do that. Not easy to do that. But if we acknowledge who we are, where we're at, and pause, and think, where would we like to be? Where do we need to be in order to sustain ourselves? Then with support, we'll be able to make that roadmap for ourselves. And Leon is creating a roadmap for you, which, by the way, I have to share with all of you, began 20 years ago. More than that, actually, 1985, here in Washington. I'm coming back. I worked in D.C. for almost 12 years with David Levy, Attorney David Levy, who co-founded the Children's Rights Council. That set the stage for joint custody, now referred to as shared parenting. And joint custody was finally brought into 30 states over a 20-year period of informing and educating political leadership and providing testimony at different legislatures and significant constituents within different states. You know, we understand what parental alienation is, and I believe what's important is that we need to control it, not by examining borderline personality and narcissism and getting into more detailed examinations of pathology, because quite honestly it's a behavior that's exhibited by 1/3 of parents who split. And if that's the case, this is not, we're not dealing with tuberculosis. You know, that affected 1 of 7 people historically in this country, and worse in other countries, nearly 100 years ago. Can you imagine? And 1/7 of the population, or 1/6 of those who are going through divorce and child custody matters, are impacted by parental alienation. It's not a pathology, it's a behavior. And the problem is, and I'm not here to debate that with anybody, but to tell you that when people are pissed off, they're going to do anything to hurt you. They don't know restraint, they only know immediate reactions and responses to their own disappointments, which, by the way, might be related to their own childhood traumas. And you won't know that until there might be some kind of a forensic evaluation, or which is too often bandied about. But only through therapy can that be addressed, and should be. I want to be mindful of time, but I need to tell you that if we take a look at what the process is in the court system today, clearly there's a need for court reform. And there are a number of court reforms that I do want to suggest to you, which, by the way, is not unique for this country. Internationally, you may know that there are movements internationally by parents like you who are suffering from being targeted by an alienator. And the courts lack the responsiveness. Why? Probably greed. The phenomenon of parental alienation was determined over 35 years ago by Richard Gardner. And he said parents are capable and do alienate their children. This is child abuse.
Yes, it is.
And this needs to be controlled.
Yes.
And it continues. I was at the Rayburn building 3 or 4 times holding our press conferences for the Children's Rights Council, informing those interested from the Congress on the matters of family failure through alienation, the inability of parents to comply with court orders for visitation and access to their children. But I want to say that when I've heard Leon speak, I feel that much of the work that I did here and nationally with David Levy, my mentor, and you need to read about him, because he's the one that helped bring joint custody to the 30 states, and he was a very gregarious man. And I have my moments, I will tell you, because I've not seen my children in more than 20 years, and I suffer as you suffer. But I also did stand-up comedy for 3 years, and that saved my life. I got a lot of tomatoes.
No questions, no questions. Presentations. We had a protocol. Please honor it. Go ahead.
Thank you. German courts don't let anyone represent, no parents to represent themselves or be represented if they're not from Germany, if they're not German. Japan recognizes only mothers. They don't recognize the value of fathers. And this is a cultural as well as a political problem. Italy, Australia, and the UK, as I mentioned, the UK, I believe, or I have it in my mind anyway, they have federal laws, but they're not enforced and they're not examined, and they're banding around the purpose of mediation, but they don't do more than that. So, the loss in this country due to parental alienation, due to a number of things, angry and vengeful, as well as narcissist parents, you know, they want to protect themselves, they want to get even, family court process that disregards the social research, and that's what my book is about. the research you can use to help in many of your circumstances, a family court process that doesn't understand the needs of children and doesn't give a damn. I don't care if you call them family service departments, as they do in Connecticut, or family courts that provide social services or other so-called supportive services. In the court process, there's a winner and a loser. Well, you know what? That's not what families need. They're not in a jousting contest. Their goal is to continue parenting their children. So, we're here today to draw attention to the facts that alienating a child against a parent is criminal.
Yes, it is.
It's an emotional child abuse. Alienating a child against the other parent has a 30% chance of destroying any further possibility of a normal relationship. Leon referred to this. You know it. You've experienced it. And the statistics are huge. That this alienation is abominable. It is causing society to further erode. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I want to look at statistics, right? And if you get, the takeaway that I would ask you to think of is this. The number 30. Why? Because nationally, 70% of kids graduate high school. It means 30% do not. Remember, 40% of kids live in single-parent households? Here's another number, 40. 40% of kids in public school are on behavior modification drugs. Aren't these kids having problems dealing with the loss of one parent from their household? But meanwhile, they have to be medicated. So these statistics, very basic, but very significant, and you need to use it in your argument when you reach out, I believe, to at least have commentary about that. Remember the silent majority. As a mediator, I will tell you that the experience that we had with the Toby Center, and I've got 37 people in the field throughout most of Florida. We've expanded to Connecticut. We're going to Toledo, Ohio soon, I believe, and Colorado Springs. The thing is that most people, 70%, do agree to agree, right? They, as parents, post-separation, they come to agreements about how they're going to raise their children, what's important for them, and when they're going to be seeing their children, what kind of schedule. 30% do not, because one is so severely objecting and want to revise history and get rid of you from the life of your children. You are a big statistic. We are a big statistic. You don't have to be a rocket scientist, Chris, you might remember that point. Right? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over. Well, that's, if I may, frickin' stupid. And that's frickin' family court. FFC. Get a load of this. In dependency court, or in probate court, different states have different names, but when children are in temporary foster care, there are special courts for them, either juvenile court or dependency court or probate court. Everyone is working together and helping to reunify the child. What they want to do is be sure that the child will have a successful relocation, reintegration in their bio family. And the child has been removed for many different reasons. But essentially, in that court where the kids are in temporary foster care or have been, the goal is for the judge and the GALs, case supervisors, and all those involved are working together. Why not in family court? Because in family court, people have money. It's the Roman Colosseum.
And divorce court, too.
So, I was an advocate in Washington, in Connecticut, in New England for many years, and I believe part of the artillery softening up at least the atmosphere, because David, it was through his essential work in bringing joint custody, shared parenting into so many states through national conferences, invitations to speak, providing appearances in state capitals. When I came to Florida 10 years ago from Connecticut, it was to create a center that I felt was needed by parents. It would have saved my life, and from what I researched and what I've experienced in these 10 years in Florida, we become the dominant provider of supervised visitation and therapeutic visitation and family therapy. I can't believe it. I'm not making much money from it, but and we're not supported either in Florida, sadly, financially. We're 501c3. But I will tell you that it's clear that parents appreciate the efforts. And the federal government's Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of Child Support Enforcement, they have a fund. It's an annual child support and child access and visitation grant. That money is dispersed among the states to provide for mediation, family therapy, supervised visitation for parents that do not have the funds. And Florida and many states, I would say a good 25%, give all that money either to one provider or they give it to their DCF or their human resource department, the one that handles the issues of foster children. Not to say that they don't need it, but family court suffers. Those in family court suffer. So the key to preventing child abuse, what we found, is building stable, healthy, well-connected families. And protective families are conditions in families and communities that, when present, increase the health and well-being of children and families. And what are these protective factors? This is talking points for you. Protective factors serve as buffers. They help parents who might otherwise be at risk of abusing their children to find resources, supports, or coping strategies that allow them to parent effectively. And what I want to do is share with you before, do I have a thank you. What I want to do is suggest, if you have the opportunity to speak with your legislators and say, first of all, ask them with a smile, hey, if you were to get a divorce, if you were to separate from your spouse or your partner, and you're concerned about having access to your children, what do you think's going to happen? You're an attorney. Got any idea? Have you spoken to your constituents? Got any sense of what your odds are in not seeing your children again? Do you have any? It's 1/6. It's like dying of tuberculosis 100 years ago. So, when you sit with these people and you make it real, then you say, this is what needs to be done. This is what needs to be done. Number one, give parents a self-assessment. That self-assessment will reveal how they feel, because it's all about feelings and emotions. The hell with psychoses and pathologies. That's for treatment. How do people feel when they split? How do people feel when they divorce? How do people feel about their child custody matters? Get a self-assessment and you'll know. Then, if you see that someone is really having a difficult time, then you can provide that intervention through the courthouse or at the recommendation of the court. Establish a therapeutic peer group, support group for parents to begin to understand why they feel as they do. And when a parent is given temporary assignment of the child's residence, it must be with the caveat that any effort to sabotage visitation or to brainwash a child will require immediate change of residency. And this must be done at the very beginning. This does not need to be fought for in court. Now. And you bring that up to your legislatures and legislators, and you see what kind of people they really are. For the courts, I would urge that their goals be modified. There must be an understanding that if there is a rule of law, that rule of law must reflect ethical decision-making. And Leon so wonderfully quoted a number of justices. And I want to add one more. Louis Brandeis, former Supreme Court Justice. And he said, law without ethics is not justice. And you tell them that. And you tell them that. If the system is not working for 30% of families who split, and that's 100,000 kids, if you multiply by 2.5 or 2.8 each year, who are suffering, woe in this country. As you heard, 30% of kids don't graduate high school. You've got kids who suffer from alcohol and drug abuse. This opioid epidemic that increases, the kids who are using alcohol, self-inflicting medication. 80% of kids who take up guns and mass murders are products of single-parent households. Do we not have a problem, for crying out loud? Do we not have a problem?
Humanitarian crisis.
You better believe it. You better believe it. And without healing, there can be no improvement. And we continue to spend money on treating symptoms. What bull? Help parents when they split. Help them. It's an epidemic. It's a tuberculosis epidemic, and you need to treat it as a disease. And you can prevent it with interventions that start in the courthouse if they change their philosophy, and if they implement little by little. They can make modular changes, and I write about that also. It's called Project FACT, and if you want, you can email me, and I'll send you information. Families and Children in Change, in Transition. And it's a program for the courts, and you can share that with your connections in your communities. But the legal profession is charged with representing their client, and I understand that. That's the system. That's the system. But they represent their client to their full and utmost and vigorous representation. It's not the place of family court. The jousting, the fighting, the gladiators are not for family court. I recommend it to people if they're going to family court, I say bring some popcorn. Have a good time. In the most extreme cases, parents exhibit hostile behavior, either overt or covert, okay? They unconsciously or with forethought vilify the other parent, usually the absent parent, in the eyes of the children. And courtroom battling and domestic conflict cause children to feel insecure at best. Children are conflict. By the way, I wrote that. That's from my book. I wrote very little about parental alienation, but I have 3 pages and a very important footnotes. But I will tell you that it's so incredibly abusive, and you may want to ask, how many attorneys today, practicing today, are themselves products of single-parent households and alienation? More than 25 years ago, I'll tell you that right now. Sanford Braver is a retired researcher, Dr. Sanford Braver from Penn State University. He wrote a book called Shattering the Myth, which uses a lot of research on what happens when parents split. Their behaviors, their mindsets, their attitudes. And he found that 6 months before and 6 months after a divorce or child custody case is when domestic violence is at its height. That's research you need to refer to, because if indeed that is true, and I would not question Sanford Braver, is one of the most prolific researchers in the field of divorce, right?
Yes, sir.
So you need to quote him and demand that courts reform. Family courts must reform if they want to. We are doing more, and I've been faulted for many years when I said this, but I increasingly say it, and that is, we are doing more through family court to destroy our society than terrorists from outside or inside this country. I hate to say this, it's very troubling, but it's true. It's true. If you talk to cops, you find out what they're dealing with, things that could be prevented. If you look at the boards of education and the challenges they have, my best friend, one of my best friends, my college roommate, is an attorney with the Board of Ed and one of the largest Board of Eds in the country, and that's Palm Beach County. He said, Mark, you're right on, but there's nothing we can do. And I say to him in Italian, "Baffangu." Because I'm getting too old. I'm running out of patience. And I'm pissed. But I'm confident that what you're doing here today will continue to make a big difference in a much more accelerated fashion. And I would like to honor David Levy, for having softened up the enemy with his barrages. And he killed with kindness, by the way. And he had to restrain me. He had to restrain me. So, we're dealing with children and the impact of child custody decisions, which will be felt not only to parents now. And Chris, let me ask you, do you remember how many generations kids will be impacted? I want you to remember this. 6. What family courts do now will affect not only what happens to the people in that courtroom now, but those that follow them up to 6 generations. The courtroom has dropped a bomb on a family. What happens? Many things happen. And that impact will affect more than 30%. It'll affect everybody, but definitely the 30% that we know are so severely impacted. So, let me conclude. With conventional litigation in family court, the biases of judges, the personalities of contentious parties, the misinterpretation and fabrications of abuse and fear completely undermines what is appropriate and sensible and moral. My belief, again, is that it's not the debates of narcissism and personality disorders that are material for the short term. What is most important is the introduction of behavior modification, and you bring to your leadership those that can consider looking at how we can change family court in a piecemeal basis, but let them realize that behavior must be controlled. And I had just one. I don't want to have anybody return here next year to further complain and disclose the horrors of family courts, which cannot handle parental alienation. No. Next year, we want to return here to thank our national leaders for their support in appropriate means for helping parents in high conflict to resolve their child custody issues peaceably and restoring for their children a life of joy and love and contentment, and I thank you.